Growing up, I spent many summers in the Ozarks. At an early age, I fell in love with its rich history of lawmen and bandits. Over the years, I've learned much more about the Ozarks, including its dark and mysterious lore. Join me, Blasky, as I dive into this lore, the myths, superstitions, and urban legends of the Ozarks. This is Ozark Mountain Lore. Several years ago, my wife and I were visiting her parents in the small town of Shell Knob. This town is buried in the Ozarks along the coast of Table Rock Lake. One night while staying here, I had trouble sleeping, so I got out of bed to step outside to get some fresh air and to stretch my legs a bit. The three-quarter moon shined just enough light to illuminate the woods just 50 feet from the house. That is where I saw it. A creature that to this day I still cannot explain. A creature that looked to be covered in gray fur and appeared to be standing upright at a monstrous 8 feet tall. I thought at first it had to be a bear, but the way it moved quickly through the woods and on its hind legs looked more like a gorilla, making some grunting sounds along the way. I was only able to catch a glimpse of it before it quickly ran back into the thick woods. Now, I'm not one that's quick to jump to conclusions. I try to look for the most rational explanation first. It's only then, when I can't explain it, that I start to look more closely at the impossible. Sure, it's most likely a bear just roaming around at night, but the way it walked and the sounds it made didn't feel like a bear. And then I started hearing similar stories echoing through the Ozarks. Stories of a large creature with a pumpkin-shaped head, terrorizing residents with its glowing eyes. Or how about a demonic beast with a distinct howl, unlike any creature you've ever heard. Let's not forget the tale of a man covered in blue fur that may crush you with a giant boulder if you find yourself unfortunately in its path. I'm not saying that monsters are real, but there are several tales that suggest the contrary. On this episode of Ozark Mountain Lore, we're going to look deep into the wooded hills of the Ozarks to peel back the pages of the lore of MOMO, the Blue Man of Spring Creek, and the Ozark Howler. MOMO. Doesn't sound like a frightening name, does it? Sounds more like something cute a kid would name a pet or a stuffed animal. Not something that lurks deep in the woods, staring at you with its large beating eyes, feeding on livestock stolen away from a local farm. MOMO, which is short for Missouri Monster, is a story about a large hulking creature that dwells somewhere in Louisiana County in eastern Missouri, just on the very edge of the Ozarks. According to the lore, MOMO is described as a foul-smelling creature that stands between 8 and 12 feet tall, with a large, odd-shaped head, most commonly referred to as being pumpkin-shaped. Its glowing red eyes could be seen piercing through the trees at night. The creature's arms hung low, and at them, a hand with 3 long fingers. Its supernatural strength gives it the ability to toss over cars and throw railroad ties like lawn darts. Some of the lore suggests that stories of MOMO sightings can be traced back as far as the 1940s, although the most prominent ones began around 1971, when 2 women by the name of Joan Mills and Mary Ryan claimed to have seen MOMO along Highway 79. They described what they saw as a half-man, half-ape hybrid. Another widely circulated story features the Harrison family, also in Louisiana County. The lore tells the story of a boy and his sister who saw the beast on the edge of the woods carrying a bloody animal. Some say it was a dog, others just a creature unfortunate to cross paths with MOMO. One poor farmer lost his dog one summer evening. According to one account, the worried farmer set out to find his lost companion, but with no luck. Some local kids claim to have seen a beast carrying a dead dog in its arms throughout the woods earlier that day. Others said that they heard terrifying growls coming from the woods also that same day. Did the poor farmer's dog meet a terrible demise at the hands of MOMO? Hard to say, but for the dog's sake, let's hope not. The Great River Road runs along the eastern Missouri border and the Mississippi River, and is a famous road known for its history and its connection to tourism. What you may not know is it too has its own MOMO sighting. The story goes a man heard his dog barking like crazy in the middle of the night. The dog was barking and going frantic like one might if its territory was being infringed on. The man got up to check on his dog, who was focused on one spot along the trees just behind his house. What he saw, he couldn't believe. A large, monstrous creature standing tall, covered in black fur, and a foul odor that was choking the air. These stories about this foul monster caused such a stir at one point that a group of men, rumored to be anywhere from 20 to 100 of them, armed with pistols and rifles, went into the woods with the intention of tracking down whatever had been terrorizing the area and bringing it to an end. The group never came across MOMO, and eventually the stories began to fizzle out, at least for a while. The Missouri Monster, even though it doesn't have a very clever name, is a terrifying tale that to this day continues to be told from one generation to another. Some still say they have seen the pumpkin-headed red-eyed beast poking his head out from the woods from time to time. If you smell the stench of rotting meat followed by a terrifying growl, take caution. It may just be a bear or something much, much worse. MOMO is just one of many different monster tales you will find in the Ozarks. In the southwest portion of Missouri, in the county of Douglas, you will find another story of a monstrous beast wandering the woods, chucking large boulders at anyone it feels is a threat. I'm talking about the legend of the Blue Man of Spring Creek. The Blue Man of Spring Creek was one of the most widely believed stories that made its way through the Ozarks. There have been stories of alleged sightings as far back as the 1860s. What really got the story going was an article that was published in 1950 that recalled an account from a hunter back in 1865. The hunter's name was Sol Collins. Collins claimed that he had a close encounter with the feral creature after tracking it for several hours. Collins wasn't sure at first what it was that he was tracking. Maybe a large bear, or maybe a mountain lion. Either way, it would make for a nice trophy. What puzzled him was the tracks. They weren't exactly like bear tracks. Regardless, he continued to pursue, stopping only when the creature would let out a bone-chilling roar that he described by saying, quote, "It made the hills echo with an ear-splitting scream." Finally, Collins came upon the creature that he had been tracking for so long, only to see not a bear or a mountain lion, but a man-beast that he believed to be 8 to 10 feet tall. Its body was covered in a thick black fur that when the light would hit it would almost appear blue, hence the name, the Blue Man. Around his waist appeared to be animal hides and furs. The Blue Man would spot Collins, and with what he said was minimal effort, began to throw large boulders at him until it finally ran off into the mountains. After that, Collins returned to town to gather others to continue pursuing it into the woods. They continued their search for several days before returning home empty-handed, although some claim to have caught glimpses of it during their pursuit. The same year the article came out, sightings of the Blue Man began to pop up in local papers throughout the Ozarks. The counties of Ozark and Howler were claiming to have seen the Blue Man. Loggers throughout the areas also claimed to have seen this otherwise elusive monster. Stories ran amok about a caveman-like monster that was seen carrying dead animals and scaling the mountainsides. Of course, not everybody was on board with these stories. A paper in St. Joseph, Missouri, just north of Kansas City, would write an article poking fun at the story and those who believed in it. It's another one of those stories that makes you wonder, where did it come from? Is this all just pure imagination by those looking to entertain themselves and others? Or did these stories stem from real life? Unlike MOMO, there is a possible explanation and backstory to the Blue Man. There is a story that took place pre-Revolutionary War when Missouri was still part of the Louisiana colony about a French trader and his female Spanish companion who traveled to the colony in hopes of trading with some of the local fur traders. Growing tired of his companion and looking to strike a deal, the Frenchman would trade his companion to a Native American chief in exchange for some furs. The Spanish woman would be taken away by the chief and held captive until she was able to escape into the woods, where she would then lose her mind and become a more savage being. The lore claims that she would bear children with other natives in the area, birthing these monstrous men. Supposedly, there was a small colony of them that lived in the mountains for some time until their numbers began to dwindle. It wasn't long after the stories of the Blue Man began to circulate that they began to fizzle out. Sightings became less frequent, and some residents would even look at you puzzled if you mentioned a story about a paled caveman who lived in the Ozarks. Was it just a craze that caught the attention of so many? Or was the blue man real? Just a simple yet terrifying man-beast that made a home for himself in the mountains? It's hard to tell. Many of us will tell ourselves it was a bear that frightened simple folks. But we didn't see what they saw. Who are we to tell them that it was all make-believe? Probably one of the most notable tales that has infested the Ozarks for decades, drawing attention from hunters and cryptologists alike, is the tale of a creature that has a howl so distinct, so terrifying, that it was named just off that alone. Of course, I'm talking about the famed Ozark Howler. Anyone who has lived in the Ozarks more than a few years has come across the name the Howler, or maybe one of its other names, like the Black Howler, the Nightshade Bear, and the Devil Cat. The Howler's description varies in size depending on what lore you read or hear about. It's often described as being around the size of a large bobcat or wolf, although some have claimed it can be up to the size of a bear. It has a thick body with stocky legs with black hair and glowing red eyes. From its head, 2 large horns that swirled back like a ram. A frightening monster to encounter while traveling through the woods, but not nearly as frightening as the howl it would make right before it takes you. A sound that can only be described as a cross between an elk and a hyena, mixed with a howl of a wolf. Not a sound that can be duplicated by just one animal. Unlike the 2 previous stories I mentioned, the Howler is rooted more in the world of superstition and witchcraft. In fact, some people believe that the Howler is a shapeshifter that possesses the power of a witch, or is used by a witch to do her evil bidding. As far back as the 19th century, Howler sightings have been popping up all throughout the Ozarks. And I do mean all throughout. Sightings of the Howler has made its way into Arkansas and Oklahoma. There has even been sightings that can be traced back to the early Native American tribes. Even Daniel Boone claimed to have killed one back in 1860. Kinda makes you wonder, how can something that has been seen by so many not be real? While researching the Howler, I came across a story about a man and his son who were out hunting one fall day in the southern part of Stone County, less than 10 miles from the Arkansas border. The day had gotten away from them, and before they knew it, the sun was beginning to set. Unable to make their way back to the cabin before dark, the father and son found themselves stranded in the woods without the aid of light to help guide them the rest of the way. The father, a strong and solid man, held on to his son, putting on a brave and stern face. He looked deep into the night in hopes of finding something familiar to help guide him out. His son, trembling behind him, found comfort only in the bravery his father was showing. That was until they both heard what they could only describe as a scream that came from the depths of hell. The howl of the Howler had rung out throughout the trees, reverberating off the mountains. At this point, the father was equally as scared as the son. That's when they began to hear footsteps behind them. The father reached for his gun, spun around and pointed it forward, ready to fire upon whatever may be lurking behind them. But nothing was there. So the two began to walk once again when the sounds of steps returned. The son tried to peek behind him to see what it is that could be stalking them. That's when it made eye contact. A 4-legged animal, similar to a lynx, was stalking them just off to the side, its eyes red and fixed on the duo. The boy tried to warn his father, but as he was about to do so, they found the cabin and quickly ran inside and locked the door. The boy had told his father what he had saw. They both gathered around a single window to see if they could catch a glimpse of what was stalking them. They waited patiently before hearing the horrifying howl once again, emanating deep from the forest. Once again, you have to wonder how these stories have made their way into the Ozarks. Where did a creature like the Howler come from? Has it always been here? Or did it travel here many years ago with those who came in search of a new beginning? Traces of the Howler can be found back to European folklore about hellhounds that were black dogs and they were considered to be an omen of death. If you heard the howl, it wouldn't be long before death finds you. Celtic lore said the dog served the underworld, helping it claim lost souls for its master. Even churches and churchgoers had taken to believing in the Howler. Cumberland Presbyterian Church in Arkansas featured the Howlers in the stained glass as a nod to the folklore. When a new preacher had taken over, he ordered the stained glass to be removed immediately. Not long afterwards, the church was burned to the ground. Some claimed it was the Howler taking revenge against the church. Stories of Howler-like creatures attacking churches can be found in stories all throughout Western Europe. The Howler to this day remains one of the most intriguing legends you will find in the Ozarks. Do we have an unholy monster living in the Ozarks, stalking us, cursing us? A hellhound brought here by European settlers with a howl that can only be described as not of this world. Or is it just Celtic and English lore, mixed in with Native American fables passed down through the generations? It's hard to tell, considering that to this day, sightings of the Howler continue to pop up. Before we wrap this up, I wanted to see if you noticed some of the similarities between the three lores. The thick fur, the terrible howl, the fact that it dwells mostly in the forest, its supernatural strength, its red eyes. Is it possible that MOMO, the Blue Man, and the Howler could all be the same monster, just told differently, based off one's personal account? Could they be descendants of each other? Or are they just spin-offs of previous lore, an adaptation of local myths blended in with lore brought over from across the ocean? As for my monster, I'm still not entirely sure what I saw that night. Was it MOMO? The head didn't quite match the lore. What about the Blue Man? What I saw was gray, not blue, or in this case, black. How about the Howler itself? No howl. So maybe I was fortunate not to encounter any of these three monsters during my stay in Shell Knob. Perhaps it was just a bear, or maybe a friendly Sasquatch. On next week's episode, they come from outer space. Little green men landing in Missouri? A farmer who claims to have met his distant cousin and has spent time on the moon, as well as on Mars. Plus, other freaky stories about UFOs darting across the Missouri skies. It's coming up on next week's episode of Ozark Mountain Lore. For more content, follow AroundTheOzarks.com on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and X, or go to AroundTheOzarks.com and subscribe to the daily newsletter so you don't miss when new episodes drop.